Over the last couple of days, I've seen some news about Fusion 360, which is a little bit concerning. That news is talking about changes to paid subscription version of Fusion 360. So Hackaday have posted this up, and essentially what this is talking about is the removal of features from the premium subscription of Autodesk 360, and they're cutting it down so that if you use any sort of simulation in your designs, you won't be able to run those simulations locally on your own hardware. You will have to purchase and use cloud tokens. Let's look at the model. There is a post here from Autodesk saying that the updates to Fusion 360 Simulation Workspace. It's going to start on the 6th of September 2022, and the ability to run simulation studies on your local computer will no longer be an option for simulation solving. That sucks. A lot of these companies are running some high-end graphics cards, especially if you've got a CAD specific department. You might have some serious cash invested in the workstations to enable you to do some of this stuff pretty quickly. All simulation study types within the simulation workspace of Fusion 360 will have cloud solving options only. They're going to affect customers who use linear stress, modal frequency, thermal, and thermal stress simulation study types. So this is paying customers now going to get nerfed. How will Fusion 360 subscribers be able to access these simulations going forward? So they're saying that you have to buy tokens. Modal frequencies, you've got to have 3 tokens, thermal 3. So they're pretty much saying for these modal, thermal, and shape optimization, they're going to take 3 tokens per simulation. Then nonlinear stress, event simulation, injection molding simulation, and structural buckling, 6 tokens. Let's go to buy tokens. For 500 tokens, you're looking at 1,410 UK pounds. Effectively, that's £2.82 per token. We're looking at nearly £6 per simulation. Now, that's not going to sound a lot, but ultimately, this is a simulation that could quite easily and is currently being done locally. So they're taking away that feature and saying it's now behind a paywall. Now, I've got a problem with this. I'm using the personal use of Fusion 360, so I'm not directly impacted by this. However, I see this as being a thin end of the wedge where it comes to services being scaled back. We saw this a couple of years back with Fusion 360 personal license having a lot of features taken away. They used to have a startup license where I believe if you made less than $100,000, you could use the software fully featured, etc. They essentially reduced the scope of what the personal license was capable of doing by comparison to this startup license. Most notably, the number of open projects that you could have was limited to 10. A lot of the functionality for exporting was scaled right back, and you lost support for things like anything more than a 3-axis CNC machine. For a lot of what I do, I don't have a problem with that. I can kind of understand where Autodesk were going with those changes to ensure that people weren't abusing the service that was being made available to them, so that, at the end of the day, if you can't afford a license for Fusion 360 and you're making it, it's your business, then there's probably more wrong with your business than the cost of a license of Fusion 360. From my perspective, I've not got a problem with what they did with the licensing. It upset a lot of people in the maker community, but from a business perspective, I kind of understand it. Here, we've got a situation where we're removing functionality that a client's PC is capable of doing, and we're saying, no, you have to do it in the cloud and you have to pay for it. So there's 2 possible scenarios in my mind that is going on here. Number 1, Autodesk has got a serious financial problem in that they are moving towards pretty much everything. This is SaaS, right? This software as a service. But they're starting to part out functionality of that to an extra tier of monetization, whereby you have to buy these credits. So I see this as being an issue with, they've either got a monetary problem, they're losing clients, and they want to monetize more heavily the ones that they do have, or they're skimming a bit of profit off the top, taking the client for the ride. I think long term, this is a bad move for Autodesk. Why am I so het up over it? If this is what they're doing to their clients who are paying a premium license, what's coming down the pipeline for those entry level people coming in on a personal license? I don't think it's going to be long before we're going to start to see some moves on that side as well. Either restriction of service or putting certain features behind a paywall, which that would be very disappointing in my view. For me, you know, Autodesk's personal license has enabled me to learn the software. It has enabled me to do projects. That could in turn lead to me making a change in my career, where I go into a manufacturing house that uses Fusion 360, you know, and it's getting me to an employment point of view. Or even if I decide to make a startup, I could be using Fusion 360 and become a client of theirs. So I'm really not happy with, you know, this move overall. I think either we're looking at a product or a company that's kind of having a bit of a wobble. Maybe their division isn't hitting their financial targets, or we're seeing, you know, customers being fleeced. It might be I need to dust off my FreeCAD and get my head under that again. I will say I didn't like FreeCAD from a user experience point of view, and Fusion 360, and I've championed Fusion 360 to the point where the UI is very intuitive. It does what it says on the tin. Moving over to FreeCAD would be like Mr. Bean driving his car from the roof. So yeah, I got a bit of a bee in a bonnet about it. Hi there, it's Future Steve in the edit. I wanted to include the additional information that was to hand from the time of recording to the time of editing, and this is what's hot off the press. There is a way forward to have the simulation in the cloud as part of your package. It's likely to be an additional paid tier on top of what you're already paying, but Autodesk is saying that you need to reach out to them and they can work with you to find the best way forward. Autodesk have subsequently come out with a statement explaining why they've made these changes. Unfortunately, they didn't do that at the time of the announcement, which you would have thought from the lessons of changing the licensing, you thought communication would have actually been kind of like a top of the agenda, but at least they've published a statement as to why. Let's take a quick look at what the reasons are. First of all, they're talking about productivity. Essentially, when you run one of these simulations, they're stating that Fusion 360 becomes unavailable to the user to be able to do other work. By moving these simulations into the cloud, the user can then move on to another piece of work. However, if I was a business owner and I'd spent quite a lot of money on workstations that have computational power to run these simulations, I would have liked to have had the choice as to whether to be productive or not. To some extent, removing that feature from Fusion 360 has kind of wasted the money that I invested in the workstation to be able to do the job in the first place. The second is around performance, stating things like some of the studies that can be done cannot be matched on a local solve versus what can be done in the cloud. Presumably there's some data center somewhere with a lot of CPU cores that are working these computational problems to return the job to you. That I can kind of get, in that you're able to return those computational problems back as quickly as possible. So they're also stating that the OS versions that Fusion 360 runs on can have a bearing on the performance of the computational results. I mean, honestly, it's Mac or Windows. It's not like you've got a bunch of Linux operating systems in here and so on, but maybe I'm splitting hairs. But I think the big thing here is that regardless of the intentions of Autodesk in making these changes, they're ultimately taking consumer choice away for something which is now a chargeable service. If I've spent 15, 20 grand on a workstation, I want to leverage that to do the job. I will admit though, I am looking at this from a hobbyist perspective, not a business perspective, and arguably if the performance improvements that I yielded as a result of moving these to the cloud, could I become more profitable as a result? That could be a justification, which from a large organization or an organization that turns over a high volume in revenue or product, that would probably make sense. But for small to mid-tier business, I think that potentially may be at a lesser extent. So if you're impacted by any of these changes by Autodesk, why not pop down in the comments what you think of these changes and how you think that's going to impact you in the future. Why not check out one of these videos just here?